It sliced bread once, and something far darker the second time. Welcome to Mystery Path. I am your host, Asher Vane. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Your voices make these mysteries unforgettable. Let's begin. If you want to make Nero Wolfe lift an eyebrow before lunch, you have to do one of three things. Step on his orchids, misquote Marcus Aurelius, or enter the brownstone without Fritz Brenner announcing you first. On a gray Tuesday in March, a woman managed the third, and by the time I reached the front hall, she'd already committed the fourth. She was holding something sharp. It wasn't pointed at me. It wasn't pointed at anyone. It lay flat across her open palms like an offering. A bread knife, 14 inches, serrated, with the kind of toothy grin that makes bakers humble and surgeons jealous. The blade still had a fine dusting of flour clinging to it, as though it had rolled off a counter straight into Fifth Avenue traffic. "I need Mr. Wolfe," she said, "and I need him now. I'm Archie Goodwin, and if you've heard the stories, you know I've escorted more distraught clients into Wolfe's office than nurses shepherd cats into bathtubs." This one made me reach automatically for the little notch in the jamb where the chain slides. People who carry knives, even horizontal ones, make me thoughtful. "You might," I told her, "but you still need to tell me your name before you go parading serrated steel around my boss's sanctum. Also, Fritz appreciates it when visitors don't accessorize with cutlery at the table. He thinks it's tacky. My name is Olivia Harrow. I'm a baker. This knife was used twice. I can prove it, and if Mr. Wolfe doesn't help me, the third time will be on me." Her eyes were the kind you see at 3 in the morning in emergency rooms and late trains. Clear, tired, and unamused at everyone else's pace. She was in her late 30s, maybe, with a cream-colored coat dusted by actual cream, the pastry sort, and a linen scarf that had probably been a respectable shade of blue before the flour did its socializing. The knife, I noticed, had a faint nick near the tip. Somebody had hit bone or board, or both. "You've made it interesting," I admitted. "That gets you inside. But the knife stays with me." She hesitated. "If I let it out of my hands, I'm finished. And if you don't, you're not speaking to Wolfe. He's got standards about weaponry and upholstery." She waited, then flipped the handle toward me. I took it and put it flat on the hall table. Fritz, who had materialized from the dining room with the kind of quiet competence that makes you wonder if he's really Swiss or some higher life form, frowned at the crumbs falling to his parquet. "Excuse me," he murmured, and produced a handbrush like a conjurer. The crumbs disappeared. The knife didn't. I ushered Olivia into the office. Wolfe occupied his throne, behind the desk, mountainous and immovable, wrapped in a yellow vest that glowed like late butter. The big globe loomed over his right shoulder, and the smell of beef stock, Fritz's simmering, crept through the door and fought a losing battle with Wolfe's distaste for interruptions. Wolfe glanced at the knife on the table, then at me. "Archie," he said, "have we inaugurated a cutlery deposit?" "Visitor policy update," I told him. "You can mark it under the heading Prudence. Miss Olivia Harrow, baker, bread knife, twice." "Twice," he repeated, not delighted. "Madam, sit if you must. Speak if you can be concise." She sat on the edge of the red leather chair, as if she respected furniture the way she respected ovens. Useful, but hot if you overstayed. "Mr. Wolfe, yesterday morning the head of the New York Guild of Artisanal Bakers came into my shop, took a loaf I made, and accused me of theft. Not money, recipe." She watched him, measuring whether he cared. "He said I stole a heritage grain blend they'd been guarding for 3 years, and that I was selling it under my own name. I told him to come back with a lawyer and a pallet. He promised to return with both. Wolfe folded his hands. And the knife? This morning, I arrived before dawn and found the door unlatched. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, except the knife. Someone had taken it from the rack, used it, cleaned it badly, and put it back. But on the block behind it, under the groove, there was a line of something red. Not blood. Beet reduction. We don't serve beets. Shocking, I said. Vegetable fidelity in this day and age? She glanced at me, not appreciating my tone, but recognizing it as permanent. There was a note taped under the counter, a copy of my recipe card, with one ingredient swapped. Malted einkorn for sprouted rye. The einkorn is what the guild accused me of stealing. The handwriting was mine. Except it wasn't. It was traced, or someone had watched me write and imitated it well enough to fool my night manager. Your night manager is a gull. Wolfe shut his eyes halfway, which is when his brain starts sprinting. Who else has keys? 4 people. Me, my Sue Baker, my supplier's delivery guy for mornings, and my landlord superintendent. The guild head, Lionel Regard, doesn't. He's threatened to sue me twice in as many months, but he prefers open doors he can force with subpoenas, not crowbars. Twice, Wolfe said again. The knife and the accusations. And the bread. She leaned forward, elbows almost but not quite on her knees. Mr. Wolfe, the first time that knife was used, the twice, it was a month ago. I found the same nick that morning. I thought a customer had grabbed it and whacked through a boule. I shrugged it off. But yesterday, after the accusation, I pulled my old records. The day after that first nick, Lionel Regard came in and bought a loaf. He'd never done that before. He called it research. And you think, Wolfe murmured, that he used your knife in your shop twice to cut something he should not have had? I think he or someone working with him broke into my shop twice to stage a pattern. First to plant the recipe swap, second to underline it, to make me look like a thief who'd stolen their grain and then clumsily tried to hide it. They'll come with a lab test next. They'll prove my flour has their blend, and I'll be finished. My contracts, my reputation, everything. I had been watching her hands. Baker's hands can be soft or burnt. Hers were nicked, the knuckles red from heat and the fingernails clean, but not cosmetically. She gripped the armrests like dough hooks. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. Miss Harrow, I am not a laboratory, nor am I interested in guild politics, culinary feuds, or, God forfend, recipes. The vicissitudes of wheat cultivation concern me only at mealtimes, and then chiefly as they affect Fritz's breadbasket. Why have you brought this here? Because, she said, meeting his eyes. Last night, after I closed, someone called my private cell and said, "You've been cut with your own knife. The next cut won't be flour." Then they hung up. They want to ruin me, but they also want me scared enough to make a mistake. I can't go to the police with a knife that only cut bread and a threat that sounds like a bakery ad. But someone is orchestrating this, and I was told you could see patterns even when the dough looks smooth. He breathed, long and heavy. Who told you that? Saul Panzer, she said. That got a flicker. Wolfe didn't look at me, but he might as well have. Saul doesn't donate our name lightly, and when he does, it's usually because he's decided we'll take it anyway. When did you speak to Mr. Panzer? Wolfe asked. This morning, she said. A friend of mine, an ex actually, but that's complicated, suggested him. Saul said if I wanted brains and discretion, I needed you. He also said you charge more than most people pay for their first car. Wolfe made a small noise that might have been a sigh or might have been a calculation. Archie. Yes, sir. Fetch Mr. Panzer? Now. Now. I stood. You'll excuse me, I told Olivia. If the knife moves, yell. If Mr. Wolfe moves, faint. You'll have cause for gossip. In the hall, I pocketed the knife in a folded dish towel. Fritz's disapproval landed on my back like a napkin grenade, and headed for the door. I didn't love being the errand boy for a non-murder. But there was something about the phrase used twice that had snagged Wolfe's attention. He collects duplications like other men collect stamps. 2 visits, 2 cuts, 2 accusations. Someone had drawn a line across Olivia Harrow's life with a serrated blade, and Wolfe wanted to see if the line was straight. Nokonakora. Stoop! I dialed Saul. He answered on the second ring, which means he was either awake or had been hired by an insomniac. Goodwin, he said, you sent us a baker with a knife. I send you all sorts. You have a preference schedule I should be following? Next time a florist, less slicing. Wolfe wants you here, now. I figured. She's telling it straight? She's telling it scared. That can look like straight. Bring your taste buds and your calendar. We may be needing alibis. He grunted, which is Saul for on my way, and hung up. When I came back in, Wolfe had closed his eyes again. Olivia was sitting perfectly still, like a student waiting for a professor to pronounce the grade that decides a life. Fritz came with coffee. Hers black, Wolfe's with a cloud of something that wasn't milk because he's fussy, and mine none because I'd committed the towel offense. Miss Harrow? Wolfe said without opening his eyes. How many people knew the guild intended to accuse you formally? Publicly, just Lionel Regard and his lawyer. Privately, he hinted to half the guild. People talk. But none of them had my recipe card. Only my staff and me. Names. She gave them. Marta Bell, Sue Baker. Kevin Chen, night manager. Dorian Rusk, supplier's delivery guy. Edgar Null, the landlord superintendent. I wrote them down. And the ex? I asked. Her mouth twitched. Evan Kleiner, food writer. He likes scoops more than he likes people. Does he like you enough to feed you to a guild for a byline? I asked. He likes me enough to be guilty, she said, but not that guilty. Saul arrived 20 minutes later, silent and rain-specked, his hat shedding droplets on the hall rug. He nodded at me, at the knife, at Wolfe, at Olivia, in that order, which told me he'd already read the room before the door shut. Wolfe finally opened his eyes. Mr. Panzer, you have told this woman I could be of use. Explain to me briefly why I should be. Saul looked at Olivia. She didn't flinch. Because, Saul said, the guild's lab test will come back positive, and she didn't steal a thing. Someone is swapping flour in her supply chain or her bins. It's clean, it's repeatable, and it's going to put her out of business. They've already tried twice. The third time will be the article, the lawsuit, and the bankruptcy. If you want a puzzle you can solve from a chair, this is it. You'll barely have to smell yeast. Wolfe exhaled, a sound like a shutter falling. Very well. Miss Harrow, you will deposit a retainer of $5,000. Archie will provide a receipt. Mr. Panzer will begin at your shop immediately with my instructions, which he will not improvise. I will not taste your bread. I will not attend your guild drama. But I will, if sufficiently provoked by ineptitude, expose the imbecile who thinks duplication is subtlety. Her shoulders dropped an inch. Relief looks different on bakers. It settles like proofed dough, slow but definite. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Do not thank me. Yet. He lifted a finger. You said the knife was used twice. You are wrong. It was used thrice. Someone cut with it the night before you noticed, then the first time you did, and again last night. Archie? Yes. Bring me the towel. I want to see whether Fritz will faint or explode. I handed it over. He inspected the nick near the tip, the faint flour, the trace no one else had seen, the tiniest glint of oil, not kitchen stock, but mechanical. He dabbed it with a handkerchief, sniffed, nodded once. Olivia, he said, who oils your doors? The superintendent, she said. Edgar Null. Wolfe's eyelids descended. Mr. Panzer, begin with Mr. Null. Archie, accompany him. Miss Harrow, go back to your ovens and behave as if you are oblivious. That is likely your strongest suit. And for God's sake, keep your knives in order. I stood, the knife back in my custody, and Saul rose with me. Outside, the rain had thickened. Inside, Wolfe reached for the bell. Fritz, he called, lunch. The brownstone was disturbed, but not yet shaken. We had a blade, a baker, and a guild with a grudge. Wolfe had taken the case, not for any noble reason he'd confess, but because someone had tried to make a pattern and had left a smear of machine oil on a bread knife. For Wolfe, that was practically a slap. We went out to find the hand that slapped. Saul didn't say much as we made our way down to Chelsea, where Olivia Harrow's bakery, the Golden Crumb, stood wedged between a French antique shop that hadn't sold a chair since Hoover and a dry cleaner with a sign that had been misspelled since Clinton. The awning was a clean ochre with dark letters, and the windows carried that faint, permanent haze that only bakers and magicians know how to achieve. Warmth leaked through the walls, even with the door closed, and the smell outside made me briefly consider dessert before business. Inside, it was pristine in the way only an obsessive baker could manage. Flour-free countertops, racks polished to a quiet shine, baskets lined with checked linen like they'd just come back from boarding school. No customers at this hour, which was just as well. Saul and I weren't here for croissants. She said the knife was used 3 times, I said under my breath. And Wolfe figured it out from a whiff of oil. He didn't figure it, Saul said. He noticed there's a difference. Saul had that kind of tone you don't argue with unless you want to play second fiddle in your own band. He peeled off his coat and got to work like he had flour in his blood. We started with the staff. Martha Bell, the Sioux baker, was in the back kneading what looked like pain au levain, with the kind of stern attention usually reserved for neurosurgery. She was in her mid-30s, built like a kettle drum, and had a voice that could cut granite without pause. I didn't see anyone tamper with anything, she said. That knife stays on the rack. I clean it myself, wipe the handle with a bleach cloth, and put it point down. Even if you're tired, I asked. Especially if I'm tired. And Olivia? She ever leave things loose? She's a control freak. She's not loose with air. We got the same kind of answer from Kevin Chen, the night manager, a student at Columbia who worked here overnight to pay for textbooks and, I suspected, therapy. He was pale and polite, and he hadn't touched the knife since the day he'd nicked himself making a sample tray for a wedding tasting. He swore he locked the place every night and had never seen anyone lurking near the racks. But he also admitted he sometimes smoked on the back stoop for 5 minutes around 3 a.m. when the mixers got too loud. Doors stay closed, he said. But it's not Fort Knox. You jiggle the delivery entrance just right, you could slip through. We keep meaning to fix the lock. That's a nice thought, I said. But people who keep meaning to fix things often get fired by people who already have. The third name on the list, Dorian Rusk, showed up in a clattering handcart at 11:15 sharp, hauling 2 sacks of flour and a crate of jars labeled black barley syrup. He looked like a gym teacher with a warehouse side hustle. Wide shoulders, stubbled jaw, and arms that could lift a bus if the bus wasn't resisting. "Who's asking?" he said when I introduced us. "I deliver. I don't spy. If Olivia thinks I'm in on something, she can find another guy to lug this junk." "Relax," Saul said evenly. "No one's accusing. But we're asking who might have access to your keys." "No one. They stay on a chain in my truck. I drop the stuff, sign the form, and I'm out. If someone's making knockoff recipes with my grain, it's not my fault unless they hijack me." He had a way of sounding like a guy who only ever fought fair because unfair fights bored him. Still, something in his answers tickled Saul the wrong way. "You ever get special requests from the guild?" Saul asked. "Ask for samples? Compare Olivia's blend to theirs?" "Couple of times. Last year, Lionel called and asked if I could send him some cracked rye samples. I said no. I work with Olivia. I don't two-time my clients." It sounded noble, but his eyes shifted a beat too late. I filed it away. So did Saul. We were halfway through jotting that down when the final name on the list made his entrance without being invited. Edgar Null, the building's super, stepped through the back entrance holding a crescent wrench and the kind of smile that wants something. He was in his 50s, smelled like varnish and cold coffee, and wore a cap with NYC Property Services, stitched in block letters that had once been red. "You must be the detectives," he said, oozing friendliness. "Olivia said somebody'd be nosing around." "Not detectives," I said. "Private curiosity?" "Well, I keep things shipshape around here," he offered. "If she says the knife was moved, that's news to me. This place locks up tight." "Except when it doesn't," I said. "She mentioned you had access." "Sure, for emergencies, leaks, wiring, you name it. I don't touch her gear, especially not sharp ones." I noticed he was wearing gloves, despite the moderate temperature inside. "You always work gloved?" I asked. "Helps with the grip. Some of those pipes will burn you through the palm." Saul leaned forward. "What about door oiling?" "Huh? You oil the hinges, right? Back door especially?" "Oh yeah. Squeaky ones drive me nuts." "What oil?" "WD-40. Why?" Saul gave me a look. I nodded. Same faint mechanical oil Wolfe sniffed from the knife. Either Null was our sneak-and-cut artist, or someone wanted him to look like it. "Mind if we see the back door lock?" I asked. He shrugged and let us out. The alley was narrow and smelled like overripe dough and wet cardboard. The delivery door's lock was a cheap turn bolt, the kind they sell at corner stores for people who trust their neighbors too much. "Locks from the inside," he said, "but the frame's old. Could jiggle if you're persistent." "How persistent?" Saul asked. He twisted it once, and sure enough, it popped with a rattle. "I've been telling her for 6 months," he muttered. "She won't spring for a new one." "Wouldn't take much to sneak in at night, use the knife, plant something, sneak out," I said. "Not without cameras." "There are cameras?" Saul asked. "Only one. Faces the front. Back's a blind spot. She wanted it that way." Saul stared at the door, then at Noel's gloves again. "You oil it weekly?" "Bi-weekly," he said. "More if it rains." Saul stepped past him and scraped a finger under the handle plate near the bolt housing. He brought it to his nose and sniffed, then handed it to me. The scent was sharp, bitter metallic. Definitely not cooking oil. "Well," I said, "we have a suspect, a knife, a trace element, and a door that might as well have a welcome burglars sign on it." "What we don't have," Saul murmured, "is a motive." We stepped back into the shop just as Olivia returned from an errand. Her face was flushed, arms full of invoices, but her eyes snapped to mine when she saw Saul's expression. You found something. Not something, Saul said. Someone. But we're not done baking yet. She paled slightly. Did Edgar Null ever ask about your recipe cards? I asked. Or act curious? She hesitated. He once asked what einkorn meant. Said it sounded like a chess move. Did you show him? I laughed it off. Thought he was being friendly. I glanced at Saul. He didn't blink. Next step, I asked him. We watch the flour. What? Set a trap. We mark one bag. Slight smudge of invisible ink on the seam. See if it gets moved overnight. If it does, we'll know when and how. I liked it. Wolfe would approve. Quiet. Smart. No drama, just breadcrumbs, literal and otherwise. Let's prep it, Saul said. Then let Wolfe know the stage is set. And tell him this. The knife was used thrice. The door opens twice. But the motive still slices only one way, through the heart of someone's pride. I didn't know if Wolfe would care for the metaphor, but I knew he'd care about the timing. The next move wouldn't be made by us. It would be made by whoever thought no one was watching. We marked the bag near closing. Olivia picked one from the fresh delivery. Second from the bottom of the stack, a 25-pound sack of heirloom rye with a corner that already had a slight scuff. Saul took a vial from his pocket that looked like something you'd use to fake a magician's vanishing act, dipped a thin brush inside, and drew a half-inch X just beneath the seam, in a spot no casual glance would catch. Invisible to the eye, visible under the portable UV light he handed to me for the overnight watch. This kind of ink doesn't last long on flour sacks, he said. If they move it, cut it, or swap it, we'll know. If it's untouched, we move on. Olivia locked up the shop with care, checking both front and back doors while Kevin hovered with his backpack on. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I stayed behind under the pretense of retrieving a handkerchief I'd never owned and made a quiet loop around the alley. The back entrance didn't inspire confidence, but the hinges were dry and well-oiled. There were no fresh boot marks, and the dumpster had been emptied recently. At least that part of city services worked. Saul, who could blend into a trash can if necessary, posted himself in a delivery van across the street. I told him I'd check back at sunrise. Olivia offered to make us coffee, but Wolfe's cardinal rule of field work forbids hot beverages from civilians. Something about leverage. So I declined with grace and headed back to the brownstone to file my nightly report. Wolfe was in the plant rooms when I arrived, an unusually late session, and didn't come down until after 9. He entered the office with a sigh that could have wilted orchids and settled into his chair like a sinking battleship. I handed him the typed summary. He skimmed it, muttering the names again under his breath. Null, Chen, Rusk, Bell. The flour, the oil, the knife. No intrusion tonight? He asked. Too early to tell. Saul's watching. We've baited the trap. I hope for your sake that you baited it with intelligence. He closed his eyes and pressed his fingertips together. I suspect Mr. Null, he said, but I have not yet concluded why. Opportunity, sure. Motive, thin. Precisely. His voice dropped to a meditative hum. No financial incentive, no direct threat, and no known affinity with the guild. Unless he wants to be the hero, I said. Blow the whistle on Olivia, hand the guild a wrapped case, get a cut of some citywide maintenance contract they control. Wolfe gave me half a glance. You are not an imbecile, Archie, but you are fond of theatrics. The guild does not control city contracts. They barely manage their own quarterly reports. I've read those quarterly reports. Boring enough to make an arsonist nostalgic. He grunted. Still, you may be onto something. A man like Mr. Null would prefer quiet gain to noisy exposure. He reached for his beer, sipped, and frowned. This is tepid. Shall I tell Fritz to chill it with the same suspicion we're showing for knives? Number, I'll bear it. He waved a hand. Report at 6. I'll want to know if the sack moves. When I got back to the shop in the pre-dawn, the sky was 2 shades darker than concrete and just as encouraging. Saul was sitting in the front seat of the van with a thermos and a notebook. He cracked the door as I approached. Nothing all night, he said. No visitors? No deliveries. Back door stayed closed. You look disappointed. I'm too old to enjoy stakeouts with no payoff. Let's check the sack. We waited until Olivia arrived. She let us in, bleary-eyed but alert, and followed us to the flour stack without saying a word. Saul pulled out the UV light. I angled it slowly across the seams. The X was still there, faint but intact. Untouched. I shook my head. Either they've paused, or they know they're being watched. Maybe, Saul said. But the trap didn't spring. That tells us something. Olivia looked between us, chewing her lip. You think they've stopped because they got what they needed? Or because they already planted the next clue, I said. When's the guild supposed to file the complaint? Next week, she said. They said they were giving me time to retract the recipe before they went public. Gracious, Saul said, like a firing squad offering you a blindfold and a sandwich. I need to show them they're wrong, she said. But I don't even know who they are. Saul nodded slowly. We might, but it's time for Wolfe to take a bite. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to the report without moving a muscle. When Saul mentioned that the sack hadn't shifted, he opened his eyes. Not surprising, he said. They've accomplished their illusion. Any further activity would only jeopardize it. Then what? I asked. Then we pull the curtain back. Archie, you will call Lionel Regard. Invite him here for a consultation. Tell him Miss Harrow is preparing to settle quietly. That should amuse him enough to accept. You want to bait him? I want to observe him. Saul, I want you to call Dorian Rusk. Request a delivery audit. Grain weights, blend ratios, and delivery times for the past 3 months. Do not reveal the reason. And Null? I asked. Null, Wolfe said, is the thread we will tug last. It didn't take much to get Lionel Regard on the phone. The man sounded like he used sourdough as mouthwash. Crisp, acidic, and superior. Miss Harrow wishes to resolve this outside legal venues, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She'd like you to come to a private office and discuss the blend. I don't make house calls, he snapped. This isn't a house, it's Mr. Nero Wolfe's office. A pause, then a change in temperature. Well, I suppose I could spare 30 minutes. Bring your blend sample, I said. Wolfe prefers side-by-side evaluations. I hung up before he could ask if we'd be serving tea. By the time Lionel arrived, the table was set with nothing but 2 labeled flour jars, a bottle of filtered water, and Wolfe's personal scale. The man walked in like he owned the air and sat down like he expected to be addressed first. He wasn't. Wolfe took his time. Then, without preamble, he said, Your blend, Mr. Regard, please. Lionel produced a small pouch from his coat and handed it over. Wolfe weighed it, pinched a sample, and sniffed. Einkorn, barley, touch of buckwheat, not unpleasant. It is exclusive, Lionel said. Years in development. Of course. Wolfe waved me forward. I set Olivia's sample beside it. Same quantity, same color. Wolfe repeated the process, then again. Finally, he leaned back. Archie. Yes, sir? Make a note. Mr. Regard's blend carries a faint trace of molasses. Miss Harrow's does not. Lionel stiffened. That's impossible. It is evident. Wolfe met his eyes. You have not duplicated her flour. You have merely added one ingredient to yours. That's not... Be silent. You came here believing you had framed a woman for theft. In fact, you have exposed your own fraud. Your accusation is predicated on public belief that your blend and hers are identical. They are not. Hers is older, cleaner, and unpolluted by commercial additives. Yours is the mimicry. Lionel looked like he'd been punched with a loaf. I don't. You do, Wolfe said calmly. You staged a reverse theft. You planted evidence in her bakery to suggest imitation, knowing the media would side with the guild's authority. You miscalculated. She has preserved records, delivery logs, witnesses. He paused. And, unfortunately for you, she also has me. Lionel rose stiffly. This is slander. No, Wolfe said. This is breakfast. He rang for Fritz. As Lionel left in a flurry of denial and soft threats, I caught Wolfe's eye. You think he worked alone? No, he said. But we now know the flavor of the lie. Let us now discover who baked it. Saul returned that afternoon with a thin folder under his arm and a line between his eyebrows that told me the contents hadn't pleased him. Delivery audits? He said as he dropped the folder on Wolfe's desk. Rusk's company logs are tidy. Too tidy. Every drop, every blend, every invoice matched Olivia's purchase orders to the gram. Wolfe flicked through the papers without speaking, his lips compressing. But, Saul added, there's a gap. Not in the invoices. Those are solid. It's in the physical bags. Wolfe looked up. Explain. According to Olivia, she receives her rye in double-sealed sacks. Rusk delivers them sealed. But last week, 3 of the bags had loose seams, as if resealed by hand. Olivia noticed, made a note, but assumed it was a supplier error. She did not report it, Wolfe said dryly. She assumed it wasn't malicious. But the timing lines up, 3 days before the knife incident. And that's when the guild started whispering about theft. Wolfe let out a long, satisfied breath. Then the contamination occurred not in the bakery, but in transit. Looks that way, Saul said. The swaps would have required someone with access to both the original sacks and a clean way to reseal. Someone who wouldn't draw attention in the loading dock. And who benefits? That's the next snag, Saul said. Rusk delivers for 5 bakeries. Olivia's the only one accused of stealing. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Not the only one using einkorn, though? Number 2 others do. But one of them, Elena Kroll's place, just went out of business last week. She claimed financial strain. Couldn't keep up with demand after a poor review. Wolfe's eyes flickered. Which publication? New York Bread Board, Saul said. Written by one Evan Kleiner? Archie straightened. The X. Exactly. Wolfe reached for the bell and rang it once. Fritz appeared, towel over arm. Coffee for 3, Wolfe said. And perhaps something from Miss Harrow's bakery. I believe we have earned it. As Fritz disappeared, Wolfe turned back to us. Evan Kleiner has no love for Olivia, but he has motive. A poor review of a rival, followed by a theft accusation against her, would clear his path to favor within the guild. Or if he were working with Regard, it would give him power over both. And if he's the one coordinating Rusk? I asked. Plausible, but inefficient. Mr. Rusk is not clever. He would be a poor conspirator. No, I suspect he was manipulated. Fed a story. By Kleiner? Saul asked. Possibly. Or by someone closer still. Perhaps the one person we haven't truly pressed. I blinked. You mean Null? No, Wolfe said softly. I mean Marta Bell. I sat up. The Sue Baker? She has proximity, opportunity, and familiarity with Olivia's routines. And if she had access to Evan Kleiner before or during the relationship, well, we might be looking at something less culinary and more personal. Revenge? Resentment? Jealousy? Or simply ambition? What does Miss Bell wish to be, Archie? She told me she wanted to open her own place someday. She said Olivia was a control freak. That might have been admiration or heat under the crust. Exactly. Saul stood. Want me to dig on her? No, Wolfe said. I want you to find Evan Kleiner. Invite him here tonight. I will speak to him before I confront Miss Bell. And me? I asked. Go back to the bakery, watch Miss Bell, observe, and if possible, provoke. Tell her Kleiner is visiting me. Say he brought fresh accusations. Let her response guide your tongue. It was a good plan. Wolfes were rarely otherwise. And an hour later, I was leaning against the bakery's glass display case, watching Marta stack proofing trays like a woman trying not to slam the truth out of metal. You ever met Evan Kleiner? I asked casually. She didn't look up. Sure, back when Olivia was dating him. He hung around sometimes, ate for free. He's meeting with Wolfe tonight. That got her. The pause was a fraction too long. The tension in her knuckles didn't vanish fast enough. What for? Says he's got new information about the flower, about who planted it. She kept her head down, but I could see her lips press into a line. Probably trying to save his own skin, she muttered. You think he was involved? I think he's slime. That's involvement enough. She shoved the trays onto the shelf and turned toward me. What do you think Wolfe will find? Truth, I said. One way or another. She hesitated, then crossed her arms. If you're fishing for me to say something helpful, I'm not biting. I wasn't fishing, I said. I was checking for surface tension. Back at the brownstone, Saul was already seated when I arrived. He had Evan Kleiner with him, a slim man with angular shoulders, a too-tight scarf, and a smirk that hadn't earned its place. This is a waste of my evening, he was saying as I entered. Then you are free to leave, Wolfe replied smoothly. But you are not free to slander. Mr. Goodwin, sit. Mr. Kleiner, do you deny knowing Miss Harrow? I dated her for 8 months, he said. It didn't end well. Did you publish a negative review of Elena Kroll's bakery? I did. She overproved everything. Dough like cotton. Flavorless. Did you suggest Rusk as a supplier to her? I've suggested Rusk to many bakers. He's consistent. What's your point? Wolfe's voice lowered. My point, sir, is that in the span of a month, 2 bakeries associated with you suffered. One publicly, one silently. You encouraged a supplier whose deliveries were subtly altered. You maintained ties to the guild through Lionel Regard, and you now offer accusations about Miss Harrow's integrity. Accusations you say came from her own staff. Kleiner blinked. I never said that. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Saul. Saul said, You told me she was leaking recipes. You said it came from someone who would know. Kleiner looked cornered for a beat. I might have said something like that. It was a guess. No, Wolfe said. It was bait. You hoped we'd turn on Miss Harrow's staff. Kleiner's mouth tightened. You did not frame Olivia Harrow, Wolfe said. But you were used by someone who did. You provided the narrative, the reviews, and the timing. But someone else planted the knife, the fake recipe card, and the flour blend. Who? Kleiner demanded. Wolfe closed his eyes. That, he said, will be revealed tomorrow. When Miss Bell joins us, you may leave. Kleiner stood, flushed and angry. You've got nothing. On you? Number, but soon you may wish we did. It would be safer. He left in a huff. Wolfe turned to me. Did Miss Bell betray herself? Not overtly, but she didn't blink when I said Kleiner was visiting. Of course not. She already knows what she did. She's waiting to see if we can prove it. And can we? I asked. Wolfe opened his eyes and smiled faintly. I have already. Tomorrow we expose it. He reached for his glass. And after that, we eat. Wolfe didn't speak much the next morning. He ate his soft-boiled eggs in silence, sipped his beer with that curious, half-meditative look he wears when his brain is 3 turns ahead of everyone else's, and refused to comment when I offered an update on Olivia's call to confirm the meeting. She'd agreed to come to the brownstone at 11, just after Marta Bell, per Wolfe's instructions. She'll be the second to arrive? I asked, still buttering my toast. Yes, Wolfe said without glancing up. The order matters. Truth often depends on sequence. Which was Wolfe's way of saying, I'm staging this like theater, and you don't skip to Act 3. At 10:58, Marta arrived. She stepped into the office with the confidence of someone convinced they're either innocent or clever enough to fake it. She wore a navy baker's jacket with a pale apron tied loose at the waist, and her eyes scanned the room in 2 quick passes. First to check who was present, me, Wolfe, Saul. Then to check what she could afford to hide. Thanks for inviting me, she said as she took the red leather chair across from Wolfe. Is this about the review? Not exactly, Wolfe replied. Please sit. I am. Sit patiently, then. She frowned, but stayed quiet. Fritz brought in a tray of espresso, 2 cups, and 1 steaming bowl of consommé for Wolfe. Marta watched it with vague hunger, as if remembering a missed breakfast, but didn't speak. 5 minutes later, Olivia arrived. She looked tired, maybe from sleep or from the weight of a week's worth of suspicion, but her spine was straight and her greeting was calm. Marta, she said softly. Olivia. No embrace, just tension in its most civil coat. Wolfe cleared his throat. Miss Harrow, Miss Bell, thank you both. I'll begin directly. Neither woman replied, though Marta's crossed arms grew tighter. For several days, Wolfe began. A pattern of deception has been enacted around your bakery. A knife used and replaced. A recipe card tampered with. Bags of flour resealed and altered. And most importantly, a narrative seeded, first within your industry, then to the guild, suggesting that Miss Harrow stole an exclusive blend. Marta didn't blink. What this narrative required, Wolfe continued, was evidence. Physical, written, and behavioral. All of which, I now believe, was orchestrated not by your enemies, but by someone you trusted. He turned his head slowly. Miss Bell, I regret to say that person is you. The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice dough mid-rise. Olivia turned in her chair, but didn't speak. Marta gave a single, amused exhale, like a dog scoffing at thunder. You're kidding. No, Wolfe said. I am not. You think I sabotaged my own bakery? Not your bakery, Wolfe replied. Miss Harrow's. You're out of your mind. Hardly. You were present for every key moment. You prepared the knife station. You handled the flour. You cleaned the shelves after the recipe card was replaced. No one would have questioned you being near anything, because you belong there. Because you earned that trust. Marta's eyes narrowed. Your plan was elegant, Wolfe said, until it wasn't. You failed to consider the flour discrepancy, the molasses trace in the guild blend, the timing of the resealed bags, delivered not by Rusk, but manipulated by you once in the building. The swaps didn't happen in transit. They happened in-house. Olivia inhaled sharply, but didn't interrupt. Wolfe continued. Your motive is layered. Frustration, stalled ambition, resentment, and opportunity. Provided, I suspect, by Mr. Kleiner. A man whose relationship with Miss Harrow ended poorly, but who might have been happy to re-enter your life with whispers and leverage. Marta's face shifted. A flicker of something, not fear, not quite guilt, but a crack. He planted the idea, didn't he? Wolfe said gently. You would never have dared it on your own. But he told you Olivia didn't deserve it, that she was difficult, arrogant, that you deserved your own place. Marta stood. I don't have to listen to this. You do, Wolfe said, because I have proof. He reached into a folder Saul had brought in earlier and produced a copy of the delivery logs. Not from Rusk, but from the bakery's own inventory records. On one page, an entry for a Tuesday morning. 3 bags of rye marked as resealed for transfer to side room, MB. It's your handwriting, Wolfe said. You wrote it. We compared it to your order sheets. You claimed you were organizing stock, but there was no transfer that day. Just a quiet substitution. Marta's lips parted, but no words followed. Miss Bell, Wolfe said, his voice gentler now. You are not evil. But you allowed bitterness to guide you, and someone, Mr. Kleiner, took advantage of that. He framed Olivia in public while you set the stage in private. I didn't want to ruin her, Marta said suddenly. I just wanted out. Out? Olivia echoed, stunned. You wouldn't promote me. You micromanaged everything. I've been baking under you for 3 years and still can't change a recipe without your approval. So you sabotaged me? I didn't think it would go that far, Marta snapped. It was supposed to make you pause, rethink things, maybe loosen up. Then Kleiner ran with it. The guild showed interest. And suddenly I couldn't back out without making it worse. Wolfe sighed. That, he said, is the tragedy of weak conspiracies. They collapse under their own ambition. Olivia stared at her. You could have just left. I couldn't afford to, Marta said, bitter. You think opening a bakery's cheap? Kleiner promised a guild spot if I helped nudge you out. I didn't think they'd file a complaint. No, Wolfe said, but you made sure they could. The room went still again. Finally, Olivia spoke. What happens now? That depends, Wolfe said, looking at Marta. If Miss Harrow presses charges, you will likely face civil fraud. If she doesn't, your reputation will still be damaged. I suspect you'll find your career path altered. Marta swallowed. I'll leave quietly. You will leave honestly, Wolfe corrected. You will submit a letter to the guild retracting your support for the accusation. You will name Kleiner as your source and explain your role in the flour manipulation. Then you will leave. Marta didn't argue. She nodded once, then left. Olivia remained seated, stunned. I don't know what to say, she said. Say nothing, Wolfe replied. Recover your bakery, keep your knives in place, and never date men with literary pretensions. She gave a small, grateful smile. Thank you. He inclined his head. Justice, Miss Harrow, is best served with clarity. When she left, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eye. Archie. Yes, sir. Record this as the second time a bread knife nearly undid a life. Second? Wolfe opened one eye. The first was in 1947, a baker in Brooklyn. But that is a story for another evening. He rang the bell. Fritz, lunch. The brownstone returned to its natural state. Quiet, warm, and free of sabotage. And the knife, cleaned and sealed, was sent back to Olivia, with a note Wolfe dictated himself. It read, "For slicing bread, not truth. Northwest by Ye. Mid-afternoon, the scent of beef consommé had long faded, replaced by the citrusy trace of Fritz's lemon polenta cake cooling in the kitchen. Wolfe, having delivered one of his more surgical moral incisions to a once loyal Sioux baker, had retreated upstairs to his orchids, leaving me in the office with the case notes, the receipt from the guild courier who picked up Marta's confession letter, and the nagging sense that one loop hadn't yet been knotted. It was too quiet. Saul dropped by at 4, not summoned, just curious. "She's gone," he said, helping himself to an armchair. Took her knives and her sourdough starter in a cooler bag. "She signed the letter?" Wolfe reviewed it himself before it left. Named Kleiner, explained the sabotage, admitted to resealing the flour and staging the card. "Clean?" "As clean as guilt gets." We sat for a moment. I sipped cold coffee, and Saul flicked a match against his thumbnail, but didn't light anything. "What are we missing?" I asked. Saul raised an eyebrow. "You feel it too?" "Yeah." Wolfe tied the ribbon, "But something's off." He nodded slowly. "You think Marta was the brain?" I think she was the middle." "Which leaves?" "Kleiner," I said. "But we've already seen his hand. He's petty, self-promoting, and clumsy. No offense. But if he tried to plan sabotage solo, it would have been in Comic Sans." That made Saul grin, briefly. "So there's another." "There's always another. The one who benefits cleanly, not from Olivia's fall, but from everyone's distraction." Saul leaned forward. "Rusk?" I thought about it. But he's a blunt tool. He doesn't finesse flour. He lifts it. He drummed his fingers against the chair. "Well, who does?" That's when it clicked. I stood and pulled Olivia's original delivery logs from Wolfe's cabinet. He'd had me file them 2 days ago. I flipped through until I hit the earliest entries, the ones dated before the first knife incident. There it was, a notation made in red pen on 3 of the order forms, verified by E.N. not Rusk, not Marta, not Kevin, the night manager. E.N. Edgar Knoll, the super. I called Wolfe upstairs. "Yes, Archie?" "I need 10 minutes. I'll explain." He didn't like being interrupted in the orchid room unless something was dying or hatching, but he agreed. When he came down, I had the order sheet spread on the desk and a new page typed with a summary. "Wolfe," I said, "I think Marta Bell was manipulated, yes. But not by Kleiner alone." He sat, lacing his fingers. "Continue." Null had access. To the doors, to the bags, to the nights Kevin smoked behind the back stoop. But more than that, he verified deliveries. Not just plumbing or hinges, flour. Wolfe's brow crept upward. "He initialed those 3 forms," I said. "The ones with resealed bags. The exact dates match the blend swaps. Now here's the part I missed. The apartment upstairs from Olivia's bakery. Owned by the same company that runs 4 of the guild's showcase bakeries." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Go on." "Null isn't just a super. He's a maintenance plant. He keeps tabs for that property firm. They lease to guild members. He's probably been feeding them info for years. Product timing, baking schedules, anything they want to know." "And what would motivate him?" Wolfe asked. "To sabotage Olivia specifically?" "Maybe money. Maybe a promise. But maybe he was told by the guild, or Kleiner, or both, that if he helped discredit Olivia, the property above the bakery would turn over, and he'd get a cut of the new lease contract. A sweetheart deal. Bonus for loyalty." Wolfe closed his eyes. "You are suggesting that Marta was unwittingly steered toward sabotage by a man who wore gloves to protect his grip." I nodded. "And the trace of mechanical oil? On the knife?" He opened his eyes. Edgar Knoll. Exactly. He rang the bell. Fritz, call Mr. Panzer. Ask him to locate and escort Edgar Knoll here, with civility, but without delay. We waited 23 minutes. When Saul returned, he had Knoll in tow, a little more ruffled this time, less confident than his first visit. Still wore the gloves, though now they were tucked in his pocket. What's this? He asked. Something wrong with the lock again? Sit, Wolfe said. I don't have long. You will remain, Wolfe said calmly, until I finish. That tone works wonders on reluctant guests. Mr. Knoll, Wolfe began, you have been the eyes and ears of a property conglomerate for nearly 7 years, during which you've monitored, reported, and discreetly influenced the tenants beneath you. Mostly harmless, until this month. Knoll shifted. I don't know what you mean. You do. You tampered with 3 flour bags. You used oil, machine grade, to reseal what had been slit. You handled the knife left in Olivia Harrow's shop. You placed a forged recipe card under her counter, and you fed every movement to Mr. Kleiner. I didn't touch any. Kleiner doesn't know how to open a flour sack without turning it into confetti. You do. You marked the logs. You signed as verifier. But you didn't count on 2 things. Wolfe leaned forward. 1. That someone would compare molasses traces between guild samples and Miss Harrow's. And 2. That you left oil, unmistakable industrial residue, on the knife's handle. Oil that matches the hinge lubricant in this very building. A custom blend used only by your company. Knoll's face paled like dough that hadn't risen. Your gloves, Wolfe said, almost kindly, were not for grip. They were to hide the residue on your skin. But you missed a layer. A trace settled under your nail. Mr. Panzer will take a sample now. Saul stepped forward with a small plastic kit. Knoll bolted from the chair, then stopped. Wolfe didn't move. You are not restrained, but if you flee, the guild loses its scapegoat, and you lose your leverage. Sit, and consider your next words very carefully. Suffersat. It took only seconds to collect the sample. I didn't sabotage her, he muttered. I just followed instructions. I was told to inspect the bags. I didn't know what they were planning. Who told you? A beat. Lionel Regard. Directly? Number through the company, a middleman. But Kleiner approached me once, said it would help the future of the craft. I thought it was harmless. I didn't know they'd blame her. Yet you forged her card. I was told it would prove consistency. I didn't think. No, Wolfe said sharply. You did not think. You executed. The silence that followed was long, thick, and final. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, you will call Olivia Harrow. Ask her to come here. She deserves to hear the conclusion herself. Knoll didn't speak again. When Olivia arrived, Wolfe spoke softly, succinctly. She listened without flinching. When he finished, she only said, Can I press charges? Yes, Wolfe replied. But first, I suggest public clarity. Knoll will write a statement, tonight, naming Kleiner, naming the company, naming the act. It will be distributed to the guild and to the local press. She turned to Knoll. Do that, or I'll bury you in court. He nodded, too fast. An hour later, the letter was drafted, signed, and sealed. Wolfe read it aloud. Olivia approved. When the brownstone returned to peace, Wolfe sipped his beer, then murmured, Deception baked in layers, Archie. First the sponge, then the crust, then the knife. I grinned. And justice, served hot? Number justice, as always, best when cooled. Fritz entered with lemon cake. Wolfe took a bite, closed his eyes, and smiled. Like so. By the time Olivia left the brownstone that evening, Null's confession in hand, her name cleared, and the final smear of sabotage exposed, there was a quiet restoration in the air. The kind that arrives not with applause, but with the sigh of something put back in place. The silence in Wolfe's office stretched long after she was gone. Wolfe sat motionless in his chair, fingertips pressed lightly together, eyes half closed in the way they are when his mind is still turning over the final flourishes. I didn't speak. I've learned better. When Wolfe chooses not to fill a room with words, it's either because he's satisfied or because he suspects one last crumb hasn't fallen. After a while, he spoke. Archie. Sir? I do not require another report. The case is complete. That's not usually the end of your sentence. It isn't. He opened his eyes. But tonight, I'm not interested in a record. I'm interested in a question. Well, I'm cheaper than a philosophy professor. Shoot. He didn't smile. Why do men, foolish men, believe sabotage is strength? I blinked. Because strength's hard. Sabotage is easier, like cheating at solitaire. No. He lifted one finger. Solitaire at least implies you can play. What we saw here was not just ambition turned sour. It was ambition fed through cowardice. Marta Bell was frustrated. Kleiner was bitter. Null was greedy. But none of them dared build. So they tore. He tapped the armrest once. Miss Harrow built. I nodded, and almost lost it. Yes, he said quietly, because in this country, people mistake chaos for cunning. A man who disrupts is called brilliant. A woman who controls her kitchen is called cold. And those beneath them, if resentful enough, will find oil in knives. That's grim, I said. It's accurate, he replied, and tiring. I let that settle, then added, but it's also why we exist. He looked at me sharply. Because, I said, if people like Null and Kleiner can organize petty disasters, then people like us organize quiet restorations. Wolfe actually smiled at that, though it looked like it cost him something. You are occasionally an acceptable companion, he said. I took that as the Nobel Prize it was. The next morning, the bakery's name appeared on Breadboard Daily with a headline that read, Guild Confession Clears Harrow of All Wrongdoing. It quoted from Null's statement. It included Marta's signed retraction. It even, in the closing paragraph, admitted that the blend Kleiner had championed in 3 recent columns was revealed to contain a flavoring additive inconsistent with guild purity standards. The subtext wasn't subtle. Kleiner, as expected, went quiet. At 10:30 sharp, Olivia arrived again, unannounced but not unwelcome. Fritz admitted her and guided her into the office where Wolfe, surprisingly, stood to greet her. I came to say thank you, she said. You already did, he replied. You brought the cake? Number that was gratitude. This is thanks. She set a small package on the table, wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. Wolfe unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a chef's knife, 6 inches, handmade carbon steel with a maple handle. Not a bread knife, she said. I figured you deserved something sharper. Wolfe didn't smile, but he nodded once, which in his world is equivalent to a standing ovation. I'm going to be all right, she said. Some staff left, others stayed. Clients are back. You will recover. She hesitated. Marta? She will not, Wolfe said. But perhaps she will learn. Regret is occasionally educational. Olivia turned to me. You were right, you know. About what? About why sabotage happens. I shrugged. I've seen a lot of it. But you missed one thing, she said gently. Sometimes people sabotage others because they don't believe they can ask for more. I considered that. Wolfe did too. I offered Marta a raise last month, she continued. But I didn't offer her a voice, and people don't forget that. Wolfe said nothing, which meant he was listening. I don't excuse what she did, Olivia said, but I'll learn from it. She left quietly, without fanfare. Wolfe sat down again. I hate lessons, he said. That's why you rarely repeat them. Humph. We spent the afternoon cleaning the case from the board. Saul had returned to his usual haunts, and Fritz, I later learned, had stashed the maple-handled knife in the kitchen drawer reserved for rare occasions, alongside the silver butter curler and the vintage zester Wolfe only permitted on anniversaries. Around 6, as the sun dropped low over the roofs of West 35th Street, Wolfe leaned back, picked up a single sheet of paper from the corner of his desk, and said, "Archie, write this." I waited. "To Miss Olivia Harrow," he dictated, "I accept your thanks. I return them in equal measure for reminding me that there is dignity in flour, precision in crust, and truth even in tools misused. Yours, Nero Wolfe." I wrote it down neatly, sealed it in an envelope, and for once didn't even add a wisecrack at the end. Some stories don't need it. The following day began as most peaceful days do at the brownstone, slow, wordless, and marked by the predictable rhythm of Fritz's footsteps, the chime of cutlery from the kitchen, and the delicate click of the orchid room door shutting behind Wolfe. He was up early, relatively speaking. By 10, he was already seated in his chair, belly cloaked beneath a vest the color of bruised persimmons, and gazing with faint disapproval at the morning paper, which now carried a brief editorial from the Guild. They had, in language both evasive and polite, acknowledged an unfortunate breakdown in internal verification procedures, and commended Miss Harrow's resilience under scrutiny. "Piffle," Wolfe muttered, tossing the paper aside. "Their courage is proportional to their culpability." Mild. "Well, they didn't offer her a medal," I said from the red chair, "but it's the closest the Guild comes to apology. She deserved better." That, from Wolfe, was nearly poetic. He closed his eyes and reached for his beer, which Fritz had just placed precisely within reach. He sipped it and resumed his silence. But silence never lasts long around Wolfe. Not if I'm in the room. "There's something still stuck in your craw," I said. Wolfe didn't answer immediately, but his eyes remained closed, which meant he was hearing me more intently than usual. "I would prefer not to dwell," he said. "But you are." He opened one eye, studied me. "You believe I'm unsettled?" "I believe you're curious." "About what?" "That Kleiner's role is finished." That made him pause. He lowered the glass. "He's gone underground," I continued. "No new articles. His name's absent from the next Guild event. A mouse hole if I've ever seen one." "Yes," Wolfe said slowly. "But mice do not dig without reason. They find tunnels others have forgotten." "You think he's laying low to plan something?" "I think," Wolfe said, "he never planned to lose. And those who never plan to lose rarely accept that they've done so." I leaned forward. "So what? He'll try again?" "Number that would be inelegant." He set the beer down. "He'll let time soften memory, then reappear, not in bread, not even in sabotage, but in image. He is not interested in flour, Archie. He is interested in being seen as the authority on it." "That's a long con." "Reputation always is." I stood and stretched. "So, what, we leave it there? Wait until he resurfaces?" "No," Wolfe said. "We end it." That got my attention. "You want me to keep tabs on him?" "No," Wolfe said again. "You're going to remind him he lost." He rose from his chair an occasion rare enough to register a celestial shift, and walked to the windows. The late morning light traced a pale line across his sleeve. "There's a gala next week," he said, "hosted by the Guild. They will not revoke Kleiner's membership, not formally, but they will not seat him publicly. That creates a vacuum. And you want to fill it?" "No," Wolfe said, half turning. "I want Olivia Harrow to fill it." "You want her to attend?" "Number I want her to be featured, quietly, irrefutably." The woman who was accused cleared and continued. I nodded slowly. "You're going to use Kleiner's own stage to close his curtain." Wolfe didn't smile, but he stepped back from the window with a kind of measured satisfaction. There is no better punishment for a man who seeks legacy than watching someone else write it. I picked up the phone. "You want me to call the Guild?" "Number calls Saul. He will speak to the event coordinator, Miss Geneva Phelps. She is not a fool. She will understand the optics." "And you think she'll agree to feature Olivia?" "She's already inclined. The articles softened the path. All she requires now is a reason." "And what's the reason?" "She dislikes messes," Wolfe said, "and Kleiner left her a large one." Saul arrived an hour later, and we briefed him in detail. He didn't need convincing. He already had a folder labeled Phelps Gala Seating tucked under one arm. He opened it without flourish and flipped to a section marked Pending Showcase Nominees. "She'll do it," Saul said, "if Olivia agrees to bake." "She will," I said. Saul nodded. "Then it's done." It was almost too easy, which meant something would go wrong. It went wrong that evening. At 6:30, Olivia called. Her voice was flat and tight. "I need to talk to you, in person." We met her at the shop. She was alone, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, and her apron dotted with flecks of what looked like blood, but turned out to be raspberry coulis. She wiped her hands and set down a folded note. This was taped to my back door. I unfolded it. Typed. No signature. The knife was just the start. "You may have cleared your name, but not everyone forgets. The Guild giveth. The Guild watches. Stay humble." Wolfe, reading over my shoulder, made a soft, irritated noise. Something between a growl and a sigh. "Empty," he said. Olivia stared at him. "It doesn't feel empty." "No," he allowed. "It feels calculated. But there is no threat. No demand. It's not blackmail. It's a placeholder." "For what?" "For fear," Wolfe said. "They want you rattled, less confident, hesitant to accept public attention." "And you still want me to go to the gala?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Then I'll go." Wolfe inclined his head. "Good." But when she left, he turned to me. "I want security at the gala. Armed. Visible, not aggressive. Subtle deterrence. Saul can coordinate. And if the Guild protests, let them." I called Saul. He agreed before I finished the sentence. The next 5 days passed quietly. Olivia prepared 2 signature loaves and a heritage tart for the display table. Saul arranged a soft buffer around her with 3 plainclothes men stationed in a triangle. Wolfe wrote the introductory copy for her showcase and had it submitted under Anonymous Curator, though everyone knew it was him. The night of the gala arrived, and nothing happened. That was the surprise. No sabotage, no missing flower, no altered signage. Just a steady stream of attendees pausing at Olivia's table, sampling her bread, reading the short card that detailed her return to the craft after a brief but public challenge, and nodding appreciatively. Wolfe, of course, did not attend. He remained at the brownstone, sipping beer and monitoring the event through updates from Saul and me. By 10, I called him with the full report. "She's the star of the evening," I said. "No one's talking about Kleiner, not even to insult him. He's not a ghost. He's a shadow." Wolfe exhaled. Then we are finished. Should I bring cake? Number just come home. And that was it. Not a triumph, not a final act of drama. Just the quiet, invisible moment when a knife used twice was finally put down and never picked up again. I arrived back at the brownstone just past 11. The sound of Manhattan thinning into hushed rhythms and tire hiss. Fritz had left a single lamp on in the hallway, and from behind the closed office door, I could hear Wolfe's chair creak once, a sound as distinct to me as a foghorn in the night. It meant he was awake and thinking and not ready to retire until the balance of the evening was recorded, weighed and filed somewhere in that vast, precise mind of his. I knocked once and pushed the door open. Wolfe was seated in his chair, the desk in front of him bare save for a glass of beer and a yellow notepad. His expression was unreadable, though that rarely mattered. What counted was the tension in his shoulders, and tonight it was gone. Slack, satisfied. She did well, I said. Yes, he replied without looking up. You saw? I saw everything. No interruptions, no drama, no nervous glances. Her loaves were finished first. The tart was gone in 20 minutes. And Kleiner? I set my hat on the table and dropped into the red chair. Nowhere. Not a whisper. If he was there, he was a ghost without teeth. Wolfe tapped his pen once against the notepad, then placed it down deliberately. Then the matter is settled. You believe that? I do. I nodded. I believed it too. But Wolfe's settled doesn't always mean silent. It means concluded. And conclusions, in his world, often come with a footnote. Still, he added after a moment, a disappointment. In what way? He looked at me now, his eyes clear, untroubled. Kleiner is not a genius, but he is a strategist. There was a moment when he might have reinvented himself, claimed innocence, pleaded manipulation, shifted direction. But he didn't. Number he vanished. Wolfe paused. Men who vanish in defeat do not deserve resurrection in success. I leaned back. You think he'll stay gone? I hope not. He smiled faintly. Because if he returns, he will fail. Again, and perhaps more publicly. We were quiet for a while. The kind of stillness that follows a long chase, the breath caught not in fear, but in reflection. I poured myself a short glass of scotch from the sideboard, sipped it slowly, and let the last of the gala's noise fade out of my head. I liked her, I said finally. Wolfe didn't respond. Olivia. She's not just competent. She's got something. Weight, steadiness. If she opens a second location, it'll be hers from the floor tiles to the top shelf. No subterfuge, no false modesty. Wolfe nodded once. She's already taken steps. I raised an eyebrow, you know? She called this afternoon, asked about commercial architects. Let me guess, you gave her a list of 3? 1. That good? Wolfe lifted his glass. Fritz's cousin. I chuckled. Of course. There was something comforting in that. The way a disruption ripples outward not only to cause harm, but to mend things too. Olivia's story hadn't just survived the sabotage. It had clarified itself. Her bakery, once a modest corner presence, would now expand not with splash or spectacle, but with intention, quietly, completely. And Wolfe, who cared little for social commerce, had, in his way, offered a bridge. He closed his notepad and reached for the switch by his elbow. But just before he dimmed the light, he stopped. Archie. Still here. There is one item. Minor, perhaps. He opened the drawer, withdrew an envelope, and slid it across the desk. I opened it. A simple card. To Mr. Wolfe and Mr. Goodwin, for your discretion, your precision, and your palate. Should you ever desire a second tart, The door's open. Olivia Harrow. It was handwritten in a neat, looping script. Wolfe watched my face. She brought it earlier. And the tart? In the kitchen, third shelf, chilled. I stood. Well then, you'll ruin your appetite. It's midnight. The appetite is the only thing still awake. I left him there, the card resting by the beer glass. His eyes half closed again, as if returning to some internal archive of justice served and bread sliced right. In the kitchen, I found the tart exactly where he'd said. Black cherry and almond, with a hint of lemon glaze over the crust. I cut a sliver, sat at the counter, and ate it slowly. No crumbs, no bitterness. Just the echo of a case that hadn't ended in fury or arrest or spilled blood. Just a woman, her name reclaimed, her oven warm. And Wolfe, back in his chair, already forgetting the knife. Because some cases, when truly finished, leave no scar. Just the memory of balance restored. The following morning, Fritz served breakfast precisely at 9. Soft boiled eggs, toast cut on a bias, and a slice of that same cherry tart, an indulgence Wolfe rarely allowed so early in the day. He claimed it was a gesture of closure, though I suspected he simply wanted to taste it again, before I polished off the rest in another midnight raid. He ate slowly, as always, and didn't speak until the tray had been cleared and his beer, chilled to the degree of a Swiss diplomat's handshake, had replaced the teacup. "I've decided not to accept any new clients this week," he said, lifting the glass. I looked up from the mail I'd been sorting. "Voluntary hibernation?" "Observation," he said. "We've just concluded a matter that was not about murder nor theft in the classic sense, but reputation. It's rare to see something so small cause such sweeping injury." Small? The knife, the note, the resealed bag. A man could steal $1 million and leave less damage behind. I nodded, folding a cable bill in half. Kleiner didn't need to hit her hard. He just needed to make her doubt herself in public. That's the genius of sabotage. "No," Wolfe corrected gently. "That is the cowardice of sabotage. Genius would have found a way to win by rising, not by dragging others down." He sipped his beer and leaned back. "But what lingers with me is the economy of it. How little was required to fracture trust among a staff, shake the confidence of a patronage, and pollute a product that had not changed." He tapped his chest lightly. "Even I, Archie, for a moment, doubted her." I raised my eyebrows. Wolfe rarely admitted internal conflict, let alone in hindsight. "It was momentary," he continued, "but I felt it. And if I did, others did worse. You made up for it." "No," he said. "I corrected it. There's a difference." We were silent for a while, the weight of that distinction hanging in the room like the scent of a cooling pie. Then the doorbell rang. I set the mail aside, rose, and crossed the front hall. It was too early for deliveries, too late for Saul, and Olivia wouldn't have arrived without calling first. When I opened the door, I found a woman I didn't recognize standing on the stoop. Late 30s, tweed coat, smartly tailored, hair pinned back. Her expression was composed, but cautious, like someone preparing to argue a parking ticket and lose with grace. "Mr. Goodwin?" "That's me. I was told you might be expecting me." "Well," I said. "I wasn't, but that's never stopped us before." She offered a tight smile. "I'm Vera Kint." I didn't react because I didn't know the name, but I knew enough to let her in. Once inside, she removed her coat with a precision that told me she wasn't nervous, just deliberate. She glanced around the hallway like she'd memorized its layout in a photograph. "Would you tell Mr. Wolfe I'm here?" I opened the office door and gave Wolfe the look that said, Something's about to change your day. He looked up, mildly curious, and said, "Yes?" "Vera Kint," I said. He stilled. "Show her in." She entered and took the offered chair without hesitation. Wolfe steepled his fingers and watched her. "You are not a client." "No." "You are not a plaintiff." "Not yet." "You are not, I assume, a baker." That made her smile. "Number, I'm an auditor." That got a reaction. Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Financial?" "Ethical." He frowned. "A specialty that has lost much of its rigor. I try to maintain the standard." "And what brings you to me?" Her voice cooled a degree. "The Guild." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "I was hired privately," she said. "Not by the board. By 2 independent members, after the articles. After your involvement. They want a third-party review of internal practices. And I've already found irregularities." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin envelope. Inside were 2 sheets, a typed, formal, sealed in blue ink. "One of the names I came across was yours. Not as a participant, your reputation, oddly enough, is unimpeachable, but as a disruptor, a catalyst. The members who hired me believe that if you found something, the board will attempt to erase it before I do." Wolfe nodded slowly. "That is likely." "So I came," she said, "to ask for your records. Notes, observations, anything not shared publicly, not for prosecution, not yet, just for calibration." Wolfe didn't speak. He stared at her for nearly 10 seconds. Then he turned to me. "Archie?" "Yes, sir." "Prepare the file." I didn't ask which one. I already knew. He looked back at Vera. "You may read everything. Here, not take it. I do not lend my thoughts. I permit their visitation." "Agreed?" She began reading while Wolfe drank, and I watched. She took her time. No skipped pages, no quick flips. She read every line, every margin note Wolfe had scribbled in those meticulous, looping bursts he called script. After nearly 40 minutes, she looked up. "This confirms my theory," she said softly. "Which is?" "That Kleiner didn't start this." That made Wolfe sit forward. "Go on." "Kleiner was inserted." "By whom?" "That," she said, "is what I'm going to find out." And then, without further comment, she rose, thanked us, and left the file where it was. At the door, she turned. "If I'm right," she said, "you'll hear from me again, soon." We watched her leave. The door closed with its usual muted click. Wolfe didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Archie." "Yes?" "We are not done." I nodded. "Not yet." Outside, the day stretched open like a proofing dough left unattended. And somewhere, another hand was shaping it. It was 3 days before we heard from Vera Kint again. She returned without ceremony, walking through the brownstone door with a gray folder tucked under one arm and the expression of a woman who had just uprooted something she hadn't expected to find. Fritz escorted her to the office, and Wolfe, who had already moved his afternoon beer to the right-hand coaster, looked up without standing. "Miss Kint," he said, "have you uncovered the architect?" She sat, folded one leg over the other, and placed the folder gently on the desk. "Yes," she said, "but not in the way I imagined." Wolfe nodded for her to continue. I stayed by the sideboard, notebook open, pen idle. "It wasn't Kleiner," she said. "Or rather, it wasn't only Kleiner. He was a mouthpiece. Willing, yes, but not central. The sabotage didn't originate from his ambition. It came from a strategic manipulation higher up." Wolfe gestured. "Names." She opened the folder. Geneva Phelps. That got a reaction. Wolfe's fingers stopped steepling. "Chair of the Guild's Event Committee," Vera continued. "Nominally neutral, but she stood to gain significantly if Olivia Harrow's rise stalled. Her nephew, as it turns out, was in talks to purchase an empty bakery lot just 4 blocks from Olivia's. He was seeking guild sponsorship for a fast-track opening. The problem? Olivia's expansion plan and her reputation. I whistled low. So Phelps orchestrated the discrediting? Exactly. She approached Kleiner months ago under the pretense of offering him editorial leads. In exchange, she fed him selective internal notes, suggested a narrative. Then, she contacted Knoll through the property management firm. Had them place pressure on Marta Bell, whispered promises of elevation. The goal was to fracture Olivia's inner circle and poison the guild's view of her growth. Wolfe leaned back. Not overt sabotage, just incremental corrosion. Exactly, Vera said. But it went too far. The knife, the note, it drew too much heat. When you stepped in, the whole thing began to unravel. Kleiner panicked. Knoll confessed. Marta broke. And Phelps? Denies everything. But I traced the communications. 3 calls from her office line to Knoll's supervisor. 1 unregistered meeting with Kleiner at a coffee shop 4 blocks from guild headquarters. I even found the proposed lease agreement for her nephew, dated 2 weeks before the flower incident. Circumstantial, Wolfe said. Yes, Vera agreed. But in context, damning. Wolfe closed his eyes. Then the matter is complete, he said. Miss Harrow was merely the target of a larger strategy. The knife was only the first cut, designed not to wound, but to start the bleeding. Vera folded her hands. What do you intend to do with this? Nothing, Wolfe said. That surprised her. Nothing? I do not prosecute, he said. Nor do I engage in reputational warfare, but I will ensure the right ears hear it. He looked at me. Archie. Already halfway there, I said. Saul can make sure the board hears the truth. The right journalists will pick it up. No fire, just friction. Precisely, Wolfe murmured. Vera rose. Then I thank you. And I'd suggest Miss Phelps consider early retirement. I suspect she's already begun. When she was gone, Wolfe sat in silence for a long moment. Then he reached for the cherry tart Olivia had sent over that morning, her way of marking survival with civility. He cut a slice, then changed his mind and handed the plate to me. I raised an eyebrow. Not hungry? No, he said. Just thoughtful. I sat. Phelps surprised you? Number. But her method did. She didn't try to burn the house down. She tried to plant termites. He turned his gaze toward the office window. It is subtler and more common. Outside, the afternoon was easing into the soft light that made the west side glow. Quiet, uneventful. So, that's it, I said. No new clients this week? No, he said. But if someone brings me a case where bread, knives, and reputations don't intersect, I might consider it. I smiled. Then let's pray for a murder. Wolfe didn't laugh, but he did lift his beer. To flour, he said, and to those who don't waste it on lies. We toasted in silence, and that was the end of it. No trial, no headlines, no grand reveal on the courthouse steps. Just the steady, deliberate dismantling of a lie. Piece by piece, word by word. Wolfe never moved from his chair, but the truth traveled. Into files, into kitchens, into the minds of people who'd almost forgotten that honesty, like yeast, rises slow, but sure. I filed the last, notes, turned off the lamp, and shut the office door behind me. The case of the bread knife was closed, and Wolfe, finally, was at peace. 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 Was at peace.